Welcome, everyone. Today we are here for our Tuesday coffee chat. We vote for marriage equality. A lot of people on our past chats have been saying, but isn't this already happened? And of course, yes, it did. But just like Roe versus Wade was the law of the land, Dobbs came in and took that out, and we're seeing the repercussions. So we are here to connect, empower, and engage and have a wonderful conversation about how we can all support what over 70% of Americans believe in marriage equality. Our campaign is a nonprofit, nonpartisan campaign, and I will just quickly share our screen here so you can see what we are about. It's again the why do you vote? And we're talking about voting for values that are actually bridging that over 70% of Americans agree in all of these things. So if we can have this conversation about what the future that we want, we can help co-create this and make sure that we don't go backwards in time. So we have some wonderful guests here today. I See, we have Brandi Hardy from One Colorado and Jax Gonzalez, also from One Colorado. We have Leland Murphy from Queer Coalition, and we have Reverend Dr. Mark Sandlin from Take Back Christianity. So I love that we have actually some Southern white men talking about this. I didn't expect that when we were booking. And, we're here in California running this campaign, but this is a national, most Americans agree on these issues. So I love that we are bringing these voices. And most people don't know, this is on the ballot in 3 states this year, Colorado, California, and Hawaii. So I would love to start with Brandi and Jax and talk about what you guys are doing.
Thanks so much, Holly, for having us. We're excited to be here and excited to be among the other folks who are working on these campaigns across the US. My name is Jax Gonzalez. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a political director here at One Colorado. Brandi, can you introduce yourself?
Okay. I'm Brandi Hardy. I go by she, her pronouns, and I am the lead field organizing strategist here at One Colorado.
So here in Colorado, we are a very purple state. While we have a majority in the Senate, a supermajority in the House, and a majority in the Senate for pro-equality candidates, we are still a state with a public opinion that's considerably more purple than others. And so One Colorado delayed the groundwork in 2023 and 2024 to do a referred measure to the ballot. So we were lucky enough to be able to move this through our legislature to move what is now called Amendment J through the legislature. Because here in Colorado in 2006, unfortunately, the voters passed by a very narrow majority, about 1% majority, an amendment to the Colorado Constitution that defined marriage between a man and a woman. And so here in Colorado, that not many people know that, which is our biggest barrier to our to working and educating voters here with our GOTV efforts in Colorado, is ensuring that everyone understands that there is a ban on same-sex marriage in our Colorado Constitution. And for me, it's really important that we remove this ban. I grew up in California, in Southern California. I was 17 when Prop 8 happened. It's so funny to think about where I am today. And it's really important to me that we remove this ban here in Colorado, because as a trans person, it's really powerful and important and life-saving that my trans partner can be in the room with me when advocating for medical care. So as a trans person, I'm often educating my doctors, all sorts, dentists, primary care providers, etc., on what gender affirming care means and what my care needs are, because I am on hormone replacement therapy. And in the times in which I've been able to access care with my partner by my side, things go much better for me. They're able to advocate for me. They have experience receiving gender affirming care, and they're able to notice if the doctor has missed something. And right now in Colorado, if we were to see Obergefell overturned at the federal level, we would go back to this ban in Colorado, this Amendment 43 in Colorado, which we believe would put all of the marriages potentially in jeopardy that have been done since Obergefell passed. The Obergefell decision was made. And so it's really important to us to remove this ban. So far, the community is really rallying around this. And we are really excited to be power building with our community to make sure that they know that this is on the ballot this year, and moving forward, we'll see other issues come on the ballot. Brandi, I'm curious if you have anything to add about why voting is important to you.
Yeah, Jax covered a lot of things that we are doing as an organization with our GOTV efforts. A way that we're actually doing this kind of in a bundled manner is we launched a series called Hops to the Polls, where we've partnered with brewing companies throughout Denver and surrounding areas, and really the state, as an opportunity for us to hold these in-person events and be able to talk about marriage equality in Colorado and what it looks like on a national level, since we are a shield state. I always say that we're a purple island surrounded by the Red Sea. And I actually am not from Colorado or even a friendlier state. My family, my wife and I had to move our kids out of North Dakota because of the complications, especially around politics in North Dakota about 3 years ago. And so even though we were married in North Dakota, we were still facing a lot of adversities, as were our children, from being bullied in schools to us being on a first name basis with the chief of police in the town that we lived in because of the harassment, the following, the stalking that we were constantly happening to us because we were, one, an out lesbian couple, and two, that we had children, and that isn't as favorable up in that area. There was also a lot of legislation really put into law in North Dakota over the years that we realized that it was no longer a safe place for us to be as a family. My wife adopted my oldest in 2021, and even though we're both legally their parents, there had been ongoing issues with even recognizing the legal aspect of being an adoptive parent. We had to go through hoops, and she was constantly mistreated and not viewed by family physicians or the schools as an equal parent. And so we realized that it was no longer a safe place for us to reside. And so coming to Colorado and being able to lead the efforts and coalition on marriage equality has been really impactful, because we are meeting families like mine where we've had to leave states, we've had to leave friends, we've had to leave families, we've had to leave what we've always known because it's no longer safe for families like ours to be in those states. And so being able to go around the state of Colorado and help educate those who were born and raised here, understand the influx and the population growth here, and then also helping people who have moved here understand how they become a registered voter in the state of Colorado. What are those avenues? Making sure that they understand our deadlines in the states and their polling locations and their drop boxes, and then also understanding that this is a removal of a ban, and that we're not introducing anything to the Constitution as of now with Amendment J. And then also kind of challenging some of the idea around what should and should not be in our Constitution, or what really deems equal rights. And I think an example that I can think of actually happened on Sunday, where we hosted an event, a Hops to the Polls event, and we were talking about Amendment J, and there was a person who tried to push back and say, well, why should same-sex marriage be in the Constitution? I'm a firm believer that you don't change constitutions. And, I pointed out, well, it's already recognized between a man and a woman in Colorado and in most states. And it's not about values, it's about equality. And so this is a way that we're holding space for people who may push back or have different values and ideology, while also helping them understand what equality looks like, and that it's leveling up the LGBTQ plus community from being viewed as a second class citizen.
Wow, thank you, Brandi, for sharing. I'm so sorry that you've been going through that bullying and felt that you had to move. Part of our campaign is to do social media to tell people's personal stories. And actually, we had a beautiful entry in our Spark the Vote social media and film challenge. So I'm going to share this little piece that Lorenzo did for the challenge.
So you're worried about Noah? Yes. Because he has two moms? Yeah, I don't really like the idea of marriage equality. Do you think Noah is safe and happy at home? Yes, Allie and Lauren are excellent parents. I just feel uncomfortable that they're a couple, No, I vote because I believe everyone deserves to love who they love. I have friends that are LGBTQ couples and they get bullied and they feel scared to be who they are. Why do you vote? I vote because I think kids should feel safe at school. I have a friend who lost her child in a terrible school tragedy. The two moms thing is still hard for me. Try to work on it. I never thought that maybe they'd feel scared for their safety. Why do you vote? So you're worried about Noah.
So you can see, like, when that one came into us, I was just so moved the way they shared this story and like that bullying that you've been through. And if we can keep having this conversation and wake people up about how this, I mean, that you had to move, it's mind-blowing to me. Next, I wanted to welcome Reverend Mark, well, just Mark, he said to go by and share.
Please, just Mark.
Yes, please. Continuing on this conversation, share your
Sure.
experience. And
Sure. A big part of why I'm involved in things like this is because we've got so many folks who are trying to legislate religion, and that's so problematic. And particularly in this particular area, religion, conservative Christian religion in particular, has had a massive impact on the way people approach and think about this. And the crazy thing is that they're manipulating religious texts that don't really say what they want them to say. Not only that, they're a tiny, tiny piece of what the biblical texts actually say. And so that's why I'm with Take Back Christianity. And it's one of the things we're trying to do as a nonpartisan effort, just much like yours, to say, look, there's these topics, particularly this topic, where folks are using religious texts to hurt other people and falsely claim what the Bible is actually talking about, when it's very clear that there are other ways of approaching it that are much more honest in terms of, if you're calling yourself a Christian, what the teachings of Jesus are about. So particularly in the area of LGBT rights and marriage equality, I have been doing this for a long time, at least over 2.5 decades that I've been working on this issue and writing about it for Huffington Post, for Time Magazine, for lots of different folks, because I feel guilty as a person who claims to be Christian and tries to follow the teachings of Jesus. I feel guilty when I see the harm and damage that Christianity has done, and I want to help re-educate people. And I think it's so important that when we go out and vote, and we are considering topics like this, that we look for the folks who are going to do the most good for our nation and for society, and not those that are going to be trying to target and hurt specific groups of people. And so I could start breaking down the clobber verses. I've done that many, many times ago, but I'm not going to do that here. I'm simply going to say, the larger biblical narrative is that we are to love our neighbors with no exception, and that's what we should be doing. And every time that we go out and we target and hurt the LGBTQ plus community, we're doing the opposite of that. And those folks need to reconsider Christianity, or at least the Christianity that they feel like they're following. And I think that takebackchristianity.org is a great place for folks to go and figure out, what does the text really say? How is it being used to hurt people? And what is really going on in the text, and what's a healthier way of understanding it and using it to inform who we're going to vote for and why we vote for them.
Well, thank you for bringing this perspective, and it's a great tool to how we can talk to people who we might come up with this argument. So I appreciate
Yeah.
having that tool, because I know, like, when I think,
It can be,
how can I have this conversation with somebody?
yeah,
And
it can be
so
tough.
that's
Yeah.
great. And then next, I want to bring on Leland Murphy in Texas.
Hi, Holly. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very grateful to be here with y'all and surrounded by Mark, Jax, and Brandi, who are all super awesome. So I'm excited to be part of this conversation. Again, my name is Leland Murphy, pronouns he, him, his. I'm here in Austin, Texas, and I'm representing the Queer Policy Coalition. We're a student organization at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at UT Austin, and we work to make a safer space for queer students at LBJ, but also just all students. We really want to make it an inclusive space for everyone and also do advocacy in Texas, do our little small part to help move the needle and build political power in a state that is currently very hostile to not just queer issues, but many issues like reproductive freedom and so many others. But I kind of wanted to step back for a second. Um, I feel like we, especially people who are, younger Gen Z, and I'm Gen Z, I'm 22 years old, um, can take marriage equality for granted. It seems like something we've had for a while, but we really haven't. It's only been a little less than 10 years. And I still remember when I was back in the sixth grade, this is like very distinct story that kind of almost a core memory that sticks out in my head in my Texas history class. And this was when gay marriage was starting to bounce its way around the federal court system, and it came up as a topic in class or like before class. And someone in class was, starting to make some of these kind of arguments, especially the ones that Mark kind of just talked about, using kind of religion as a crux. And, I wasn't trying to necessarily pick a fight, but I didn't agree with them. So I was kind of pushing back and kind of just questioning that and being like, but how does it hurt you, right? This is just equality for everyone. It doesn't hurt anyone, right? It's just making sure that everyone's able to get married and have equal rights under the Constitution. And just by kind of pushing back, that was, I feel like, a small part way back then of like moving the needle. And then of course the Supreme Court did rule in favor of marriage equality, thankfully. But as has been mentioned, we have seen a lot of attacks, and with the Dobbs decision, and then I know Justice Thomas's dissent or concurrence that kind of challenged not just marriage equality, but also contraceptive access and all these other things. I just don't think we can take anything for granted. And I know Jax and Brandi were both mentioning how Colorado currently has it on the books, even though it's kind of null right now, how marriage defined as man or woman. Texas is the same. We also still have statutes that are currently null because of the current federal landscape, but do define marriage in the very kind of traditional sense of between a man and a woman. But also, we still, I'm pretty sure, have anti-sodomy laws on the books. And I know we're not necessarily here to talk about that, but I mean, if they're coming for marriage equality, who says that, attacking, and they're already coming for reproductive freedom and bodily autonomy, who says that attacking even just private sexual and intimate and romantic acts are not up for grabs next? And we still have those statutes on the books. So if those kind of federal protections were ever knocked down, who knows what's up for grabs. So I think it's really important that we're engaged on this issue and all the adjacent related issues, and that we keep organizing and fighting and doing our part to move the needle. So again, super excited to be here and to talk more about that with all y'all.
Yes, and I also wanted to invite Joe, who is helping on the campaign and has been a big part of this movement in California. Joe, do you want to join up and then maybe lead the Q&A since you're so good at that?
Yeah, thank you thanks, Holly. Yeah, I've been volunteering with Holly. Holly has been our fearless leader in running this campaign of Why Do You Vote from Los Angeles. And I've been doing this a long time, three decades almost, I think. But this conversation today, or these all the statements that you all have made, have really sparked a lot of like additional new knowledge or strategies in my head as I move forward from now, not only to this election, but to the into the well off into the future. We had some really interesting conversations at our last call that were there's somewhat of a maybe a little bit of a contradiction in this call when we're talking about, our last call we were hearing from different folks that came to speak with us about there are bigger issues than marriage equality when we think about all of the letters of the LGBTQ community, specifically around, we're seeing hundreds, over 500 measures across the country with trans issues. And, some folks thinking, why are we focused on this currently? Or this less important marriage equality than the issues at hand today. So I appreciate what was brought together today because I agreed with that as well. But now hearing, especially Jax talk about their experience as a trans person and their needs as a trans person, how that changes the conversation. So the more we have these conversations, the more my knowledge is growing. And so I appreciate everyone that's here. So with that, I kind of just want to, last time we had a really great conversation, and it'd be amazing to open the floor up to everyone and ask questions to all of us. Whether you were a speaker here today or not a speaker, like we want to open up the floor to everyone. With that, I'll turn off my mic.
Well, I will say with the data on voting and youth that I've been doing a deep dive in, they are saying that 25% of Gen Z is identifying as LGBTQT plus. So this is really, on the bigger picture, this whole scope of what we're facing is so important. I have a trans child, and this is deeply important to me. Mark, I believe you also have, and then my
I do. But, in my world, people say, oh, well, that's why you're such a big advocate. And the reality is, though, I was advocating long before I had any children or even anyone in my family that identified in the LGBTQ. But it has made it more real and more important for sure.
And then my brother came out when he was 16, and my mom actually, she was Catholic, so she went to the church and said, "Why don't you accept gay marriage?" I was so proud of my mom, and this is decades ago. Yeah, so it is personal, but we all love people in our lives, have family. Like anybody who says they don't, I think is kidding themselves. Like this, we are all more alike than we think. So, of course, it's personal. It affects all of us. Jax, do you want to share more about your experience, especially with healthcare? I mean, this is so important, the legal protections. I'm able to be in as a mom when I go with my child, but and last time we were talking about all the homeless kids who were trans and the tragedy that is if they're not being accepted at home. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as someone who has been a community organizer for a long time, Joe, I really understand the perspective that marriage equality is not our most important fight today or ever. And I think that today we're able to use different talking points in the work that we're doing. So whereas, last time this was really evident in 2012 when we were all working on this across the states, the focus was on love is love. And I think that and we're just like you, for example, right? Gay people are just like straight people. We just want to get married. And I think that didn't do a great job at it. Ensuring that our whole community was included or aware of why it mattered to them. And when I tell my story today, it's coming from a place of understanding that many people might be confused or upset by us focusing resources on this right now. But being able to enter the space if my partner, for example, is in the hospital and unconscious and can't consent to me being in the room, it's really important that I'm able to do that. They have a family that they are close with. That is, they're really lucky to have that. I do not. And so if someone were to call my next of kin, and it wasn't my partner, that would mean that someone who doesn't understand who I am today, someone who doesn't understand my medical history, someone who I haven't been in contact with for a long time, would be showing up to make medical decisions for me, which would not only be dangerous medically for me, it would also be not affirming. And I tend to think actually like, it might be an unpopular opinion, but I think like my health is the most important part, right? Like being misgendered at the doctor is not my biggest problem with medical care these days. And so helping people understand that is really important. The other thing that we don't really focus on anymore because storytelling is more evident is that the research showed after Obergefell that states where there was a ban, there was a higher rate of suicidality among all young people, where states where there were protections, the suicidality of all young people was lower. And the research showed a pre and post, right? So before Obergefell and after Obergefell, and those suicidality rates decreased significantly. And again, I don't love to focus on negatives in this way. And I think that young people deserve to see a world where they have a future, deserve to believe that they can have a future. And in a state where there are protections, they are able to see that potential future and themselves in it. Whereas if there are no protections, the opposite occurs. And here in Colorado in the last year, we fought 30 anti-trans issues at the title board before they made it onto the ballot. We were able to win on all cases. We didn't get any anti-trans issues onto the ballot this year, but we believe we will in 2 years. And so one thing we're using the momentum of this year, of this election, of this moment, is to build a leadership team or a leadership efforts across the state so that we can mobilize people very quicker than we have been able to in the past towards fighting these anti-trans issues that we'll continue to see here in Colorado because we are a testing ground for this thing. And so I guess I said many things about my experience, but I also shared some others. But I think that's all I have to say about that.
I think that, like Holly was saying, the storytelling where people can see themselves in others is so effective and moving because, like what you're saying, I was thinking about my son who's straight and his girlfriend. Probably if he had to go to the hospital for some reason, they lived together, maybe she wouldn't even be allowed in his room. I don't know. So maybe those are commonalities, even though, like, because to me, everybody's just a human being. And if you're together, you should be able to be together in that setting. So does that come under just like, as a law, is that like a medical law? How do they cross over with each other? Like, what shouldn't it be that that's the case for anyone who loves each other and is together? If they're not married, you should still have some way that you have rights, just by the virtually being together. You know what I mean?
Well, there's really important protections related to marriage and relationships because, people date
just
and people stop dating.
Traditionally. Yeah.
And so
that's true. Yeah.
Those rights can be
That's true.
accessed in other ways. You can file for medical power of attorney, but those have more barriers to access, whereas marriage just automatically creates all of these legal access points, essentially, and legal
Right.
agreements. Marriage is a legal agreement, right? It's
Yeah.
not about, it's,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
so,
So I wonder, yeah, maybe there could be other agreements, even if you're not married, that allow the other person to have access. Like, hey, I'm giving them, permission to be in the room with me or something else. Like, so there's lots of different levels of issues going on. And, by telling your story, people can relate no matter, who they are. And I think it makes people more comfortable the more familiar they are with people and how they feel. Because at our core, we all love and want to be loved. And that's common with everybody, you know. And I think the more you tell your story, the more accepting people will be.
Yeah.
I think one of the important things about what you say, Nancy, is about understanding people's story. And what I've seen in the 25 some years that I've been doing this is that it is the stories we learn through relationships that are most likely to change our perspectives. The conservative Christians and conservative politics in particular have been very, very good at making us fear the other. And sound arguments, statistics, data change very few minds. Relationships that help us learn people's stories, that changes minds almost every time. And I just think it's essential to keep that in mind. The data, the information that we have and that we share is still important. It's just, it is important to recognize it as those relationships and the stories that come out of it.
Yeah, when you see love and you feel the love in someone, you should have empathy for that and connect to it, And I think what you're doing is so amazing, because people obviously use religion as a weapon against what they don't accept,
Absolutely.
So thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, I think what Jax brought up was marriage was the easiest way to get to this place, to have the legal rights, right? Because historically the gay community was like, what Hawaii? Because Hawaii kicked off this challenge with marriage equality back in the late 80s. And the gay community, from my perspective, at least, gay community in Los Angeles was like, we don't want to get married. We don't want to be straight. Why do we need that? So then it turned into this. These are the 1,400 different laws that automatically come to fruition with this legal document of being married. But yeah, it's a great conversation to have. There are a couple of questions that came up in the chat. One was for the Reverend Mark, or just Mark. Is there a one biblical passage we should know about that's particularly misused? And what's the response? That was from Susan.
Yeah, I would say the ones that get probably, you've got the Leviticus ones, which have their own issues. Those are about purity laws, and they really aren't talking about what people are trying to make them talk about. I think one of the ones that gets most misused is Paul in Romans, and it's frequently where we get people talking about that non-straight relationships are an abomination to God. And when you break it down, though, to the original Greek, what you really see is that the words and the language that's being used there is actually talking about acting counter to who you are, not acting counter to what someone prescribes as what humans are, but who you actually are. So in a lot of ways, the folks who use that argument against LGBTQ plus folks are actually making an argument saying you shouldn't change. Make sure that you work really hard to be who you are, who your genetics, your hormonal, your environmental life causes you to be. Don't Don't deny that. Live into it, because living out of it is an abomination, because it'll make you miserable, and it makes the world not quite as wonderful of a place as it could be with you being who you are.
That's awesome. Yeah, I didn't know the original translation. There's also a documentary that just came out recently in the last 12 months that is the word homosexual is not included in the Bible until it was actually added to the Bible in 1945 or 54.
47. Yeah. It wasn't even a word. It wasn't
really
even a
good
concept around.
documentary
Yeah.
out there about that. So
Wow.
thanks for that. Yeah, they actually added it for the purpose of holding people down.
Wow.
Yeah. And then, San, it looks like you had a question about what are the laws on domestic partnership to give healthcare benefits, like health insurance in the workplace. Is that any, is that a way around marriage in conjunction with? From my knowledge of domestic partnerships, it's state by state. So each state has a different. California, we're bluer than blue. We're royal blue, so we have really strong domestic partnership laws. I don't know if someone else wants to speak to that for that question.
How is it in Leland? How is it in Texas? I guess my question is sort of like, is there just from a logistical standpoint, can a gay couple be domestic partners to be able to get on their partner's insurance?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I'll preface by saying I'm not an expert specifically on domestic partnership laws, but knowing what I know about Texas, which again, controlled by extremely conservative state legislature, but I truly believe that the people of Texas don't want always what the state government is pushing. So let me just preface that. But I would have to probably say that just knowing what I know, those domestic partnership laws are probably not very strong. And so again, kind of going back to what I was mentioning earlier, sadly, there are so many statutes still on the books that if these federal protections were knocked down for whatever reason through court decisions or just state legislative action or whatever, that it would probably not be an easy option for queer couples to be able to have those benefits and share those with their partners. Just especially also, and again, that would not just hurt queer couples, but anyone and any sort of domestic partnership. So yeah, not an expert specifically on that, but just knowing what I know, it probably is not great in Texas.
Can I jump in for a second? Because I think that one of the things that I'm recognizing just in a lot of spaces, in a lot of conversations, like the one that we're having right now, there is a conversation of like broadity. And I think that we sometimes miss the fact that, yes, there should be, but we're talking from a point of privilege, right? Like when we talk in the broadities that we're talking in this sense right now, like we are speaking from a point of privilege, like we are not including the fact that historically in the United States that there has been intentional systematic barriers put against the queer community, the BIPOC community. And so yeah, sure, there should be with healthcare and with domestic partnerships. But the reality is that no matter what happens on a federal level, even with Obergefell, there are already existing barriers all the way down into the medical systems. When you do not have your healthcare professionals required to have EDI training, that then creates a barrier because those professionals no longer are taught the skill sets on how to appropriately work with the community that they're serving. So that may be trans folks, that may be non-binary, that might be, cis queer folks, that also might be a person of color who's queer with a disability. So we are already seeing the erosion and have seen the erosion. Like we've never fully made it to equality, even with Obergefell, the overturn of Roe v. Wade didn't just take away abortion and autonomy, it took away a significant number of disability protections, which, if you look at different populations, especially marginalized communities, we tend to have higher statistics around mental health related disabilities. And so I think that part of the conversation, and kind of to Jax's point, is when you put a tagline on an issue like love is love, it's not inclusive, it's exclusive. And when we are having these conversations in a more broad form, and we are coming from a place of empathy, we also need to come from a place of education. We are all in this room together, so we now hold a responsibility to do something with the information that we're learning here today. That doesn't mean you have to start working for a nonprofit. Like, that's not what I'm saying by any mean, or like become a reverend. But what it does mean is that we are no longer allowed to be silent bystanders. We're no longer allowed to allow someone to misgender. That's when you step in and say, it's they, them. And then you move on from the conversation. You don't engage in the argument. It's when you don't compare maybe rights to cis straight couples to queer couples because of the should be's. It's acknowledging that we're always going to have a barrier because we are not equal class citizens. And I think that when we are also having these conversations, that it is our responsibility to hold this space as someplace safe where people can ask those questions that may be uncomfortable, may be ill-informed, because it allows people to extend their curiosity and learn information that is relevant. Like, as an organization at One Colorado, like, we are required to make sure that what we are sharing out for public education is credible, that we are always checking and cross-referencing our resources, and that we as staff are constantly receiving training, that we are not ourselves creating barriers to our fellow colleagues, to those within our community, because just because you might represent one of the letters of the LGBTQ plus community does not mean that you are inclusive or that you believe in everyone's equal rights. There are TERFs everywhere, and they will never be on the side that we are on. And so I just kind of wanted to call out, like, we are all speaking from a point of privilege, and that we need to acknowledge that in this conversation as well.
Thank you, Brandi. That was so beautifully put. And you said you were an adoptive mom. That's another barrier where I had worked on a film about single women trying to get pregnant, and one of the women was a lesbian and was being denied in a certain state. So it's like, it's crazy, the can of worms like that. It's, when there's not federal protection, how, and the systemic history of putting people down. And I love that we're having an intersectional talk about the issues, healthcare, mental health, like the suicidality, the discrimination, it's all interlinked. And that's why we love talking about voting in regards to all of these issues, because we want to create that equal future. But I'd love for you to share also your experience, like, as an adoptive mom, and if there were barriers and what that meant. And this is often the only way, LGBTQ families can create their family. If you could speak.
Yeah. So I actually carried both of my kids. My wife is the adoptive parent. And in the state of North Dakota, it was a process. It was a very long process, especially since we were a same-sex couple. In the state of Colorado, now when same-sex couples choose to have children, both parents are recognized as legal biological parents. And so they have the same level of equal rights as each other, versus one who may carry or not, because same-sex couples aren't all females or lesbians, like and so that going through the system was one thing, but something else to recognize is there was a court case, and it could be wrong on the year, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but in Philadelphia, the Supreme Court heard a case for a an adoption agency is Catholic led, and they won the case saying that it was a violation of their freedom, of their religious freedom rights. So even though that Supreme Court case is specific to Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, that has allowed the precedents to be set so that if other states and agencies want to continue on with that, adoption agencies essentially can use religion as a way to deny same-sex couples or essentially non-heterosexual couples to be able, or parents to adopt. So that can include single parents, that can include people who are not cis. And so I think that was in 2022 that case went through. Again, I can be wrong on the year, but it was very recent. And there are states that have already started encroaching on the ability for foster parents. They deny same-sex couples, single parents, and then also making it harder to go through the adoption process. This also goes along with what we're seeing in states like Texas, where they are starting to not just mess with the parental side, but then taking away the ability for people who are going through name changes and birth certificate markers. When you take away that right for an adult, that makes it even more complicated for people to be able to start a family or to be able to have, again, those equal rights and protections if they're an already existing parent. So for someone who no longer has the right to change their name or gender marker on their birth certificate or legal form of ID, that means that barrier is now set to any sort of access to healthcare. That creates a barrier to access to any sort of like parental movement forward. Like if they were wanting to be a foster parent, they were going through an adoption process, it could even create a barrier to their right to be able to get married. And so I think those are things that we don't think about, but the Obergefell is one piece. We're still experiencing multiple levels of discrimination within the community.
Yeah, I had read one article about two moms that divorced, and then the one mom was losing all of her rights. And I was just like, this is insane. I mean, you raise a child as your own from birth, and
And then in some states, a lot of states, a woman can't make the decision to abort a fetus if they choose to. And so it's just another form of like essentially encroaching on a person's autonomy as a whole.
yeah, I'd love to ask, Mark with the church, what Christianity, what they feel, but also Leland as a young person in college, how are students feeling about what's going on these days, and like how prevalent are they getting more active? What's going on?
Yeah, I can start. Oh, Mark, did you want to go first? Okay. Yeah, I can start first. And actually, I feel like what Brandi just brought up is kind of a good segue, and I kind of was mentioning it in the chat as well. We have seen, and again, not just in Texas, but in so many states, so many anti-trans laws and other attacks on queer people. And a lot of those, were passed. And we also saw a lot of attacks on drag and other parts of queer culture and expression. So again, it's like there are so many different attacks on various aspects of identity. And it does create kind of, I mean, obviously there's the material impacts of the laws, but then even outside of those more material impacts, there is the kind of culture and kind of just creating this, where it just doesn't feel comfortable people don't feel comfortable being themselves. It is a very environment and culture of fear, which I feel like is a lot of the intended point of getting people to feel disillusioned and not wanting to, be active. But I do think at the same time, I think people are energized and are doing more to learn. And again, I think talks like these are one small part of that, and, building up conversations and doing what we can. So, I definitely think that that fear that is trying to be embedded, it is definitely there. But I also think at the same time, people are using that and then using that, those emotions they're feeling that maybe aren't always positive emotions, but then to get active and get organized. So, there is negative feelings, but I think people are getting more energized, which of course is always good. But yeah, it's scary, and definitely students, I think so many friends I know and just people I know are not wanting to live in Texas, which I don't blame them at all. Like, I mean, if you have to do what you have to do to, move out of state, but of course, for some people, that's not always an option, right? If you don't have the financial means, like, how can you just move out of a state? So, yeah, it's definitely created a lot of culture of fear, but I have to be hopeful, and I think I am hopeful from what I'm seeing that people are staying organized and getting organized and becoming more educated. So, yeah, that's kind of where I feel like students are at right now in Texas.
Yeah, as for the church, it's topics exactly like this is why a lot of folks are leaving the church or leaving evangelicalism into or other more moderate ways of approaching Christian religion. It's seen as hypocrisy essentially when you stand up and you teach that you are to love your neighbor as yourself, and then you turn around and you do hateful things towards other people. And we're seeing people leave the church in droves because of that. We're seeing folks step away from evangelical movements of the church as well and trying to find more moderate approaches to it. It's why we have things like our organization Take Back Christianity that's trying to speak to these folks who recognize the hypocrisy that the church has been living in for so long and are looking for resources to figure out how do I reconfigure, reimagine, re-understand who I am as a follower of the teachings of Jesus. And so we're seeing a lot of that happening, and it's causing a kind of a volatile state of the church. We actually are beginning to get large groups of folks in social media and social networks who are formerly churched folks who still consider themselves religious and frequently Christians, who are just saying what the church offers now doesn't match what I understand it's supposed to be doing, and I'm looking for something new and different. And in a lot of ways, as a minister, that should scare me, but if anything, it gives me hope that we are seeing through the false narrative that's been preached for far too long that eliminates some folks and says that God's love is more ready and more sure for a certain group of people than for another group of people. There's something hopeful in a rebirthing, a reimagining, a re-understanding of what the Christian faith might look like. And I think it can, and this time around seems to be having a positive impact on the outcomes of even how people decide to vote.
Yeah. And we're getting to the close. I'd love to welcome Jax. Do you have anything else that you'd like to share before we close? No. Or Brandi or Mark or Leland. No, okay. I feel like I've learned a lot. I had no idea about what you were saying in 47, adding the word homosexual to the Bible. That's crazy. Um, and Brandi, I really appreciated what you were saying about how now we should take what we've learned and coming here as a safe space to bring all of these wonderful points forward. And Jax, thank you for sharing your personal story, the medical stuff. It is frightening if somebody who doesn't know you anymore, doesn't support you as you are. So thank you for bringing that perspective too. I love that on these calls, just bringing together different people, we're having a much different conversation than we get to have just in our own local bubble. So I really appreciate this. And Leland, thank you. Does anybody else want to say anything before we end our coffee chat today?
I'd love to share just my perspective of what the conversations that are happening today, especially in this room, but bouncing off of like my historical perspective of like this specific topic, but also broader LGBTQ plus issues that have come up historically. Every generation is moving forward in amazing ways, and that's what I'm seeing today. Over this is our third call about marriage equality, and everyone that came on and is talking about this issue, and how it impacts their lives, and how they're attacking the anti-LGBTQ issues that continue to come up, hundreds of years later. It just brings hope for me as every generation moves forward. I know people that are older than me, they were always enamored by the younger individuals that are bringing these conversations forward. I really appreciate everyone on this call who's brought these issues forward and are fighting the good fight, and getting in trouble, I hope, in the process. So yeah, thank you. And thank you, Holly, for always being here to host these conversations.
Yeah. And I would love, to invite you guys to invite as many people to join our Spark the Vote Challenge, share their personal stories, because I think the reason we created it is the power of film to open people's hearts and minds with, brief personal stories of how these things impact our lives is the most moving to open people's hearts and minds to create a deeper understanding. Because I think that's the block here. People's hearts and minds are closed, and if we open them and share, we are so much more alike than different. And to always remember that we don't have to be such a divided country. We don't have to have this hate. Everybody deserves equal treatment, fairness, kindness, and that's the world, trying to create that. So thank you so much. I'm going to end the recording now.